Hi everyone, this is Lisa from Canine Connections. Most of you know me. I run Canine Connections dog training, and we're here with Denise Price, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. Today we're going to be looking at separation related problems, and I've invited Denise along because she's an expert in this field, and I thought it'd be really useful to interview Denise and talk a little bit about separation related problems. So welcome, Denise.
Hello.
I'm just going to give you a little intro to Denise. So actually, just to give you a bit of background in terms of us, we met about 7 years ago, I think, didn't we, on a dog training course. It was like the beginning of our journey into dog training, which was fun, and we've been friends ever since. So since 2014, Denise has enjoyed teaching in classes, workshops, writing for Dogs Monthly, and has appeared on BBC Radio Scotland talking about real dog yoga. Denise recently completed her Masters in Clinical Animal Behaviour with the University of Lincoln, having previously studied with the IMDT and Anglia Ruskin University. She now specialises in separation-related problems and it is here that Denise believes she can make a significant difference to the lives of owners and the welfare of their dogs. That's really great. So welcome, Denise. And my first question, actually, just sort of following on from that, is that so what is it about separation related problems that really interests you, and what impact does it have on owners' lives, do you think?
I think it's a really difficult behaviour for people to cope with, because it's going to restrict their lives quite a lot. It's something that, you know, your dog might be destroying your house, or it might mean that you can't go out at all, and so it just really impacts on the quality of life for the owners just as much as for the animal, in fact. And I think when you see the difference that you make to people's lives when they're getting over this problem, it's just enormously satisfying, because you know that, you know, you're helping them get back to a sense of normality, really. So yes, it's a hard one for the owners. It really is difficult for them when they're struggling with the dog with separation issues.
Yeah, definitely. And so what sort of behaviours would you say are separation related problems? Because it's quite a big, broad subject.
Yeah, there's quite a few things that you might typically see. I mean, owners typically complain of things like destroying property or barking, howling, that sort of thing. But I would classify really anything that comes under the umbrella of something that happens while you're away from the home. That is a problem either for you or for your dog. So it might not be your typical problems, or it might be those typical problems I've just described. But yeah, it's just those problems that are difficult for you or your dog to cope with going forward when you're out of the house, really. And that's the key point, is that you're not present.
Okay. And in terms of, because a lot of people talk about separation anxiety, and I think dogs get labelled as having separation anxiety. So I noticed you talk it in relation to separation related problems. So what is the difference, or how do you see that fits together?
Yeah, so a lot of people will call it separation anxiety, and I still use that label occasionally because it's what people understand, and it's what they're worried that their dog is struggling with. But it's important to understand the difference between whether a dog is anxious, or, for example, whether it's really frustrated and that it's really cross that it can't get out. They're quite different emotions that are running behind the scenes. So it's more to do with understanding the root cause of the problem and not assuming that it is an anxiety-based problem, because the treatment strategy is going to be quite different. If it's anxiety, you could possibly need the support of your vet with medications, whereas if it's a frustration-based problem where they're really cross that they can't come with you, it's not necessarily anxiety, it's a different emotion, and you can train other behaviours to help them cope with it. So
it's really important for owners to have that understanding of what is causing the problem, rather than trying to treat it with maybe things that aren't, you know, training or whatever, that isn't particularly relevant for that.
Yeah, I think so, because if you're looking at for example, if it's an anxiety, if it's a fear or a phobia, then like a phobia of being alone, then you're going to have to work through desensitization and counter conditioning, and those kind of programs are really quite involved for owners to take on. They're very very step by step, and it involves a lot of understanding about the animal's thresholds, so to keep them from becoming anxious in the first place, it's a real challenge. But if you don't need to go down that route because your dog isn't actually anxious, but it is just deeply frustrated by noises that are outside, for example, and it doesn't quite know how to cope with those, then there might be other solutions that are less involved or different strategies. So
yeah,
does that answer that one?
Yeah, no, as I think it's important to get the diagnosis right, I think. I mean, we're gonna go on to talk about sort of different treatment strategies, and we're gonna talk about prevention and everything, but just in terms of like signs that owners should maybe be looking for, what sort of things would be something that you'd say, okay, that there is an issue there that we need to deal with?
Yeah, so there's quite a few common signs that I would just say overall: destruction of property, howling or barking, and toileting problems. But within that, there's been some recent research with the University of Lincoln, where they've found 7 common signs, so the most common signs. So if I just chat a little bit about those, if that's all right with you. So the first one you might see is some destruction, particularly focused around the door area. So that would be what we would call exit frustration. So if a dog is really wanting to get out of the property or get out from behind a barrier, then you might see severely scratched door frames, for example, or scratching around the door. So that would be one kind of destruction. But you might see destruction elsewhere in the property, which would fall under a different category. So for example, if your dog is chewing, but it's not necessarily chewing near the doorway, it might be chewing its bedding or chewing near the window, then that could be a different sign. So it's redirecting some frustration perhaps. So it might be that it's seen a cat outside of the window and it doesn't quite know what to do about it. It tries to get out and it can't. So it might redirect onto something else. So you can see destruction elsewhere in the property that's a little bit different from your scratching near the door. So those are 2 different types of destruction. When you're thinking about the barking and howling, that one is really associated with your anxiety, the social panic side of things. So usually a howl would be a long distance solicitation of come back to me, I need you, sort of thing. So if you've got the vocalizations that aren't triggered by external events, so they're just triggered by the person leaving, then those are sort of the social panic signs. So that's where you're looking for your howling and your barking. What else have we? I've got a little list so I don't forget anything, because I'm quite forgetful in the old age. And when I was talking about barking, I mentioned about the triggers. So a dog that barks when it's on its own because there is stuff going on outside, even if it's doing it continuously, you might not have a separation related anxiety type of problem. Compare that to a dog that's howling because it doesn't want to be on its own. They're quite different vocalizations. The one where it's barking in response to different noises, for example, that would be what we would call reactive communication. So there's triggers going on outside and it's causing all sorts of emotions inside the dog of like, what is it, or I want to join in with that other dog that's barking. So it could be a reactive barking. What else have we got? We talked about destruction, elimination, so toileting problems. So that's as obvious as it sounds. They either wee or they poo when you go out. And that is usually when they're fully toilet trained that we would start thinking that it might be a separation related problem. There are some dogs that may be aggressive towards their owners when they leave. So that's another sign of separation related problem. So for example, just as you're about to exit the house, your dog might start biting at your ankles, or start blocking your exit and barking aggressively at you and saying, please don't go, I'm going to eat you if you do. And that's
God.
that's immediate frustration. So they really don't want you to go. They don't know what to do about that. And then one of their methods of coping is to bite, really, or to attempt to bite. It's very, very rare, that one. Very rarely see immediate frustration. So it's just in case that ever comes up, that the dog is actively blocking somebody's exit from a building because they're that distressed they don't want them to go. And then I think I've got them all apart from the noise sensitivity. And that's something, you know, if you've got a dog that's frightened of fireworks or thunder or airplane noises and things like that, some dogs, they can cope with those things to a certain extent when you're there, but if the security that they find from you isn't there when you're out, obviously, then they can panic and they don't know what to do without you being there, and then you will see some of the other signs coming through. So that's a trigger based one. So hopefully that's not confuddled too much.
Well, it just goes to show how complex it is, which is kind of why there's experts like you that I could pass people on to, because
yes, it's not always as straightforward as you know. The dog's got a problem when I go out. If you need to know exactly what the behaviour is that the dog is performing. And then you need to think about the motivation behind that behaviour, and also the triggers, the context. So does it do it in response to noise? Does it do it in response to passers by? Does it start getting upset before you go out? All of those things are really important in the diagnosis, because they can help you pinpoint what's going to be the most appropriate treatment for the dog.
And I know we're going to talk a little bit later on about the situation we're in at the moment and post-lockdown and that kind of thing. But do you think the impact of owners being at home a lot more is gonna have an impact on people's dogs post lockdown, or when things go back to normal?
Yeah, it could do. It could do, because the dog has become used to the new routine of the person being at home all the time, and there may not be the repetition of the absences. So if your dog if you've got a puppy and you've never built up the repetitions of those absences, then it won't have the experience to know that actually everything is all right when they go out. And then if all of a sudden you have to go back to your 9 to 5 job, not that we've got 9 to 5 jobs, but if you had to go back to work on a routine basis, the puppy might not be used to it, and it won't have learned to be okay. So with puppies, it could potentially be a problem from that perspective.
You're going to talk about a little bit about prevention puppies, which would be really good, because there is a lot of puppies around at the moment.
There are a lot of puppies.
Lots of people are getting puppies. So do you want to maybe talk us through the four different types of separation related problems, and what I know you kind of talked a little bit about it already, or about how you would deal with each group?
Yeah, so we talked about, because I know you're going to pop some slides up at little points throughout to keep people you might do
back on track.
Yeah, to keep us on track, but also to try and keep an eye on. So I've said these 7 signs, and I've talked about what you might, as an owner, see with some of those signs. But that's not to say that your dog is only going to have one of those signs. It could have multiple things going on. So for example, you might have a dog that destroys property and it also howls and barks, or a dog that shows signs of distress before you go out and then toilets indoors whilst you are out. So you do see groupings of those signs, and the recent research from Lincoln has found that there's 4 groups of clusters of these groups. So a dog may show 2 or 3 of these signs and it will belong to one cluster, or it might show alternative group of signs and it will belong to another cluster. So they've come up with 4 groupings of the signs of separation, and say, well, these ones seem to go together, and these suggest particular things about the dogs. So it might be useful if I talk about those.
Yeah.
Shall I talk about them?
Yeah. I might put you on full screen. There you go.
Oh no. I do a lot of hand signal waving and silly faces. You'll have to bear with me. Right. Okay. So I'll start with the first one, which is called exit frustration. So this is sort of how it sounds. So you've got a dog who, so all of the dogs will find being separated aversive. So in all four groups, all of the dogs don't like the fact that the owner is going out. So that's in all of them. But with this exit frustration, because they find the owner leaving aversive, when they try and go out after the owner, they try and follow them. They're prevented from doing so, either because of the barrier of the crate or the barrier of the front door. And they don't quite know what to do about that apart from try and get out. So that's why you will see with this kind of group of dogs, the frustration around the doorways and redirected frustration. So they will be scratching, chewing, and damaging around doorways. And if they can't get access to the exit point, then you'll probably see redirected frustration elsewhere. So for these kind of dogs, it's about, I can't get to be with my owner. I don't like that. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to try my best to get out, and I'm just going to keep on trying because I'm really unhappy. So that's your exit frustration group. Then there's two groups that are to do with reaction to what's going on outside. So these ones are quite interesting in as much as you've got to look at the external triggers, what's going on in the external environment that's going to upset these dogs. So we're going to talk about redirected reactive dogs first. So these guys are ones that they can hear things going on outside. They're frustrated because they can't access those things. So it could be like a passerby or a cat or a squirrel, or it could be something that startles them. And their response is that they want to try and get to this thing that they're triggered by. Okay. They can't get to it because their owners aren't present. Because they can't get to it, they're going to start taking their frustration out on other things. So these are the kind of dogs that will be barking quite incessantly, or they will be, you'll see nose juice on the window, where they've been up against the window and they're persistently looking at things, but they might be dribbling a lot near the window, they might be chewing near the window. So there's signs of stress, like physical dribbling, getting anxious near the window because there's something out there that they want to get at. So that's these guys.
Sorry, can I just ask one question?
Definitely.
With those sort of dogs, would you see them doing these kind of behaviours when the owner's present as well? Would they be wanting would they be reactive to external stimuli while the owner's there as well?
I think, yes, you will see these behaviours. So they will be more prone to being triggered by external stimuli. So they will be the kind of dogs that bark at squirrels in the garden or pigeon. But the difference really is that they associate the owners leaving with these triggers. Okay? Right, okay. So, for example, my dog will bark at the pigeons in the garden. Occasionally, she's obviously very, very well behaved. But if there's a pigeon in the garden, she will bark at it. Yeah. But there's no association in her head that I go out and then there's a pigeon in the garden she can't get to. It's not a connected event. Oh, okay. Whereas for these dogs with separation related problems where they're redirecting their reactivity, they have got it in their heads that there is some connection between mum's gone out and then the bin man comes or makes this big kerfuffle. Mum's gone out and the postman comes. So it's the connection, the association between the owner's departure and absence and these other things. Okay. And also with dogs that have, so for example, if Mabel barks at a pigeon, she might come and tell me all about it, and that's very interesting and all of that. So she's getting some response from me, whereas the dogs, when they're reacting, there's nobody there to get the security from. or the reaction from, so they don't know how to cope with it. So it's the difference in how they cope when the owner is out that makes it problematic, if you see. And yeah, they might behave in that way, but then the owner is there. When the owner's present, they might close the curtain because they think, well, I'm not having you barking at Bob the squirrel, so I'm going to close the curtain, and that will prevent the behaviour. Or I might take the dog into the lounge and sit and distract them in that way. So it's the absence of the owner that causes it to be a problem. Hopefully that helps a little bit. The other kind of dogs, similar situation in that they're inhibited though. So what this means is reactive inhibited dogs, they react to the triggers, but they don't want to go and get the thing. So your first group of dogs are responding to the triggers, and their response is, right, I'm going to go and get it. I'm going to go and sort this out. Another group of dogs, they aren't quite so happy about it. So they hear the thing and then they think, oh, I'm not happy about that. I'm a bit frightened by that noise. I don't like the look of that. I don't like the sound of that. Whatever the trigger is. If you were at home, they would come and seek security from you. So they would, if it was a dog that was worried about thunder, it might seek, depending on the level of the phobia, but it might come and seek security from you, and it might come and sit under your legs and cuddle up to you or something like that. But if you're not there, the thing that it's trying to get away from, it hasn't got a secure base to come and find somebody to protect it. So that's when that one starts getting into a bit of a pickle and it doesn't know what to do. So with that one, you might see some destructive behaviour, for example, or you might see elimination. So those are those. So far we've dealt with your exit frustration, the redirected reactive, and the reactive inhibited. And then the last category is kind of a anything else category, which is they've classified it as boredom. So this might be dogs that haven't learned to be okay on their own. So they don't have a particular fear as such. They just haven't learned that positive associations from being on their own. It could be to do with boredom, as the category is called. So they aren't being given sufficient things to do while they're out. Perhaps they haven't had sufficient exercise and they've got excess energy. So those are kind of dogs that don't fit into the other categories. So there you go. Cool. So there's your 4 groups.
Yeah, and actually the boredom one rings bells for me because I one of my previous dogs, she's not with us anymore, but I rehomed when she was about 15 months old because she was classified as having separation anxiety, and actually, so she destroyed their house basically. And I just moved into a brand new house, brand spanking new, and we picked her up and like her house was like chewed from head to toe. But actually for her it was all about the fact that her needs weren't being met. She wasn't walked enough. She was a high drive working Labrador that was being walked for 20 minutes a day and then left alone for most of the day, and she just was bored and chewed the house up. So as soon as her needs were met, she was she was fine. So it's
I see
that one.
I've seen dogs that are quite obviously fall into that category, where they're particularly dogs that have had change of lifestyle. So one example that springs to mind is a greyhound that used to live in kennels, used to be a working greyhound, moved into a family home, left on its own, and I used to walk it. And came around one day and there were books everywhere, shredded all over the floor. She'd raided the bookcase, and this sort of behaviour was occurring every time she was left on her own. And you would think, oh, she's got separation anxiety, she doesn't like being on her own. But it transpired that actually she was having a great time. She was just playing. So you'd see a greyhound doing zoomies and having a really good time and picking these books up and shredding them. And it's not that her needs weren't being met, because she was being exercised and she had a great life, but she wasn't used to having that freedom to potter about. She was used to a kennelled environment. She was used to a particular structure. So for her, the use of a crate and the reduction in freedom actually made the difference, because then she was like, oh right, okay, I'm in my crate, I've got to go sleep now, and I'll play at playtime. So yeah,
Cool.
lots of fun. It's really cool.
And actually, it's
I
quite
write my books.
interesting. It's interesting, isn't it? The one thing I would always suggest people get is the cameras around the house, so you can actually
Yes.
watch what's going on when you're not there, because it is very interesting. I was going to say, it's just really interesting to see, to watch what your dogs are doing when you're not there.
It's definitely a good thing to do, because for one thing, they might not be as stressed as you think you are, that they are, because as I say, for people, for the owners, it's really upsetting to think that your dog is distressed every time you go out and you need to go out. It's really stressful for you, but it's also really distressing thinking that your dog is upset. So for a few people, if you're watching them on video and you find out that actually they're just having fun, it's a huge relief for a start, and you know how to start going about fixing the problem. But yeah, and you can use technology to help you with the more difficult cases as well, but it is definitely worth doing, to see what they're up to.
So moving on to sort of looking at the different things that owners tend to note from their dogs when they think they have separation related problems. I guess we're looking at mainly destruction, toileting, barking and howling. So is there certain things you would look for in each of those, and how would you address one of those?
I think yes, I think so. So, and along the way we can sort of we can start thinking about prevention. So we'll talk about prevention as part of this, but as you're listening, just think, oh, what can I do? That's a good idea. I can use that to help prevent it. So yeah, if I was looking at destruction, I would think about things outside of the separation related box to start off with. So I would think, what's my dog doing when I'm out? Are they chewing, or are they doing it with their claws? Okay. So if they're chewing, then are they a puppy? Because puppies obviously need to chew a lot because they're teething and they just chew everything. So they really need to chew. So you need to make sure that they've got enough outlets for that. But older dogs need to chew as well. So some people forget that it's a natural thing for an older dog to do when they stop leaving out the pizzle sticks and the Yakkers bars and things like that, because they think, oh, my puppy is finished teething, so it doesn't need to chew anymore. But all dogs need to chew. So it could be that their needs aren't being met, which is what you described, not for your dog. But needs not being met was one of your phrases, wasn't it? So for puppies and for older dogs alike, are their needs being met in terms of needing to chew? One of the things I call play-based calamities. So the greyhound I was describing, that is a play-based calamity. So my Saluki, I used to have a Saluki greyhound called Alfie, and he was hilarious. He used to de-stuff the sofa every time I went out. And I used to put all the stuffing back in when I got home, and I'm quite good at sewing, so I used to make all these covers, and then when I got out, he used to take it all out again. So those are kind of, are they playing? Is the underlying emotion of that, is that problem behaviour play? In which case it could be another case of the needs aren't being met, and that you need to play with your dog in a more structured fashion and give them outlets for that. And then so those are kind of the just having fun. Is it play? And then you can get to the more serious side of things, where it could be to do with, and I call external nemesis. So I've got a thing where it's either a squirrel or a pigeon. These are my dog's external nemesises. They're the things that really drive them crackers when you're out, or when you're in. But can the dog cope when you're out? And if they're trying to get at that thing whilst you're out, then that's where you're going to start seeing the destruction around doorways, around windows, those kind of things. So having an idea of exactly where they're performing this destructive behaviour is really important, and it'll help you it'll help you start thinking about how to prevent it. So for example, if it was as simple as passers by the postman, for example. You could get a letterbox at the end of your driveway if it was safe, or you could put some frosting over the window to prevent the dog from seeing those things. There are things you can start thinking about that would help prevent those behaviours. Other reasons for destructive behaviour could be pain-based as well. So we haven't really talked about the relationship between pain and separation-related problems, but pain is such a big factor with a lot of behaviour problems. So another study that was conducted at Lincoln found that up to 80% of their caseload in their behaviour clinic was related to pain-based problems, but it's not always obvious that your dog is in pain. So for example, if you've got an older dog that started chewing things at home, and you know that they're getting enough things to chew, it could be that they're redirecting onto something because they're in pain. Something is hurting them, and it might be that they've been lying down because you've been out for a couple of hours, they've been still, they haven't been getting up and stretching and moving about, and if they've got things like osteoarthritis, that could start aching and hurting them after a little while. So they don't quite know what to do about the discomfort, so then they might start chewing, because the chewing will release some endorphins and make them feel more relaxed and alleviate that pain. So pain can also be something that you can start doing something about. So those are sort of things to think about with destructive behaviours.
Well, that's really interesting, because I mean, I've had my fair share of destructive dogs in my time. I think it's just really important to like really drill down into it, exactly what's happening, isn't it? Because you know, like I say, the dog I rehomed, old Ruby, 50 months ago, was, you know, destroying her house, but it wasn't anything to do with her not a fear of being alone. It was just,
yes,
I'm really bored and I need to chew, and so I'm going to chew the wood.
Yeah,
because you haven't left me anything else to do.
I think I've got story about my Jack. So Jack was my Weimaraner. I think I'll move the camera.
Oh,
so he's the Weimaraner up there somewhere. Anyway, he was such a good dog. He was my best, obviously my best friend, but he was like the one. But Jack was when he was about 12, he started chewing plasterboard but only when we went out, and he chewed a huge chunk of wall out of the way, and we got home, and he'd exposed all of the beading. I learned a term that it was beading, which was the wire that was keeping the corners intact, and he just chewed everything. And we thought, oh, he's got separation anxiety, he's really distressed. But actually what was going on was he had some severe GI issues that were related to earlier cancer. And the reason that he started performing the behaviour when we were away from the house is actually he was doing it when we were at home. It's just that we were there to prevent him. So he used to do a lot of licking. So he'd start licking the air, or he'd start licking the tiles, because he was feeling really uncomfortable in his tummy, and he needed to alleviate that feeling, and licking was helping him. And so he would start licking and licking obsessively. So when I was at home, obviously I would help him, and I would spot that he was performing this behaviour, and I would take him out to the garden, or I would give him a bonio or something. So I would give him something to do that would help alleviate the discomfort. But when I wasn't there, I couldn't do that for him anymore. So then he would just keep licking and licking, and then he'd start nibbling and chewing. And so the plaster took the hit for it. And it wasn't related to anxiety relating to me being away. It was just that I wasn't there to help him get over that discomfort. So yeah, another pain-based sad story.
So it's always good. That's why it's always a good idea to get a good vet check before looking into other things, which I know obviously you do suggest. So moving on to toileting troubles.
Toileting troubles. So I watched quite a few interesting YouTubes about dogs that go to the toilet, about dogs that soil the house when you're on your own. when they're on their own rather. And it's quite interesting because when you think of dogs having toilet trouble when the owner's out, you kind of have this vision of the dog's in a complete state of panic and there's poo everywhere, and it's just like its bowels explode and it just can't contain it because it's so upset. But actually there's quite a few videos of the dog realizes the owner is out, so there is the social panic side of things. It's because the owner isn't there, but it's not, that's a bit graphic, but it sort of potters around, and then it will do one in a particular place, and then it will potter around and do another one. So just because if you find that your dog is doing individual little deposits and it's not pooing just willingly, it doesn't mean that it's not separation related problems. On the other hand, just it could be that it's not it's not fully toilet trained. So these are things to think about with people with the new puppies who feel like they've cracked toilet training and the dog is 5-6 months old and they're ready to go out and go back to work, and the dog's quite happy for a good couple of hours, and then they start toileting when they go out. It might not be a separation related toileting issue. It could be incomplete toilet training, so you probably need to go back to basics, perhaps get somebody to come in halfway through the absence to let them just have a toilet break, for example. Or it could be an adult dog, they might have illness. So again, this is another one where if you've got a dog that's previously been very, very good at not toileting indoors, and then it suddenly starts, you see a change in the behaviour, that's a sign that something might not be well within the dog. It might not be a healthy dog. So I would be getting the vet on board for that one and saying, hey, you know, I've got a GI issue going on here. And also, as you get older, as the dog gets older, they're unable to hold things for quite such a long period of time. So your expectations might need to adjust as the dog matures. You might need to give them more frequent toilet breaks, for example. So those are things to think about when you're ruling things out for toileting troubles, when it might not be a separation related problem. It might be incomplete toilet training. You might just be leaving them on their own for too long. They might be ill, or it might genuinely be that they're beside themselves and they need to go.
Yeah, because I know, especially with puppies, if people have been at home quite a lot and they've had especially in the summer when the door's just been open all the time and the puppy's going out and doing business, and I think they assume that toilet training's finished, and it's not until that door gets shut and they realise actually they've just been lucky that the puppy's gone out and gone for a wee on the grass, and actually they don't really understand that that's where I need to go. And I find that sometimes happens, and then when they go out for a couple of hours, the puppy's peed in the house and they think, oh, I thought you were toilet trained.
And that's a really good point, because obviously with lockdown being from March through till nowish, that's over the spring summer period, so you've had a lot less wet weather, so that you're more likely to see that, aren't you? More likely to have the back door open and then just be able to go to the toilet ad hoc. So has it actually been trained to go to the toilet outside in a particular location? Or, as you say, have they just been quite lucky that the dog's preference is to toilet on the grass and they've chosen to do that? But then when they can't access it, actually this is where you might see a little bit of exit frustration as well, because a dog that's previously been able to go to the toilet just through the back door with it being open, suddenly the back door is closed, they need to go to the toilet, they can't go to the toilet because the door's now closed because you're out, and then they're leaving deposits by the back door, or they're damaging near the door because they can't get out. So seasons as well as lockdown. Yeah, interesting.
Complicated having these dogs, isn't it? It's not as easy as you think.
Yeah.
And then barking and howling. I think this is probably I think from my experience of people who say their dog's got separation anxiety, it's usually because they say my dog's howling and barking when I'm not there, or the neighbours are telling them that the dog's barking and howling. So what's your kind of advice on this one, or what do you look for when you get presented with that.
Yeah. Again, a recording of the vocalization is going to be really, really helpful in determining what's going on. So if you can video it wherever possible, that's going to be really helpful, because it could be to do with what's going on in the outside environment. So it could be an instant reaction to other dogs barking, or people going by, or particular sounds. It might happen at particular times of day, for example. So that's really useful in determining if there's any obvious external triggers. The other thing that it will be really helpful for is to understand the quality and the quantity of the barking or the howling. So if it's barking, does it bark straight away? It's the moment you shut the door, or does it bark intermittently? Is the barking high pitched? Because higher pitch, the more excited or the more stressed you get, the higher pitched you go, and then the lower pitched, that's more indicative of a territorial bark. So if you think about, you try and work out what the dog's trying to say with this bark, and if it's very high pitched and it's repetitive and it's getting higher and higher and higher, then that might show that the dog's getting more stressed. Whereas if it's like a woof, woof, a good impression there, but it's like a low pitched thing, and it's not got that same emotional quality to it, then that might be a territorial thing, where it's just telling local dogs to, I'm here, you don't need to come in. so that you can see that you might have a category of dog that's anxious and a category of dog that's just saying, no thank you, nobody's welcome in this house. So they're two totally different vocalizations. So I think if you've got a dog that's barking a lot, and it's a difficult one, because obviously you want to be on good terms with your neighbours. So it's really stressful for the person if you've got a dog that's barking a lot. So you need to get to the bottom of it quite quickly, but you need to understand what kind of barking. So if you're a dog owner that's watching this and you're thinking, all right, I've got a dog that's barking, it'd be really helpful when you see your behaviourist or your trainer to play them the recording of the barking and say, it sounds like this, and it does it. And also, how long does it do it for? Does it do it for the first 5 minutes and then it settles down and goes to sleep? Does it do it for the whole 2 hours that you're out? Because those are two very different things, really. The howling in dogs is usually it's usually trying to connect with other social beings, so it will be trying to connect primarily with the owner, or unless there's other dogs howling in the background in the neighbourhood. But howling is usually one where you would start thinking, actually it's trying to get back to being with the owner. But yeah, it's very interesting. I'm very into dog vocalizations.
Didn't you do your thesis on dog vocalization?
I did. I listened to over 2,000 dog vocalizations.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I got tinnitus out of it, but it's really interesting, and you can learn a lot about how the underlying emotion of a dog from the vocalization. So it is, it's really, really interesting, but really important that you understand. So you need to tell them how long, a recording. Technology.
And